There are moments in life that test you in ways you never imagined. Moments that take everything from you. Moments that throw you to the ground and make you wonder if it's worth getting up. I experienced this moment at 74 years old. And what I learned changed not only my life, but who I am in the deepest part of my soul. My name is Margaret. And this is the story of how I was kicked out of my own home by the people I raised, and how that kicking out, however cruel it was, taught me something no one else ever could. They can take everything from you, your home, your comfort, your possessions. But there's something no one can take away from you. And when you discover what it is, when you truly understand, everything changes. Before we begin, if you're touched by these issues and want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll be notified whenever a new story about people who lost everything but found something greater is shared here. Don't miss the chance to hear more accounts from those who discovered strength where there seemed to be none. It all began on a Tuesday morning, an ordinary morning, or at least, I thought it would be ordinary. I had woken up early 70-fold première madmitia. I sat on the porch of the house where I had lived for 47 years. The house that my husband dream, plan. Robert had died 9 years ago. Cancer, slow and painful. And since then, I had lived alone in that house, too big for one person. But it was my home. It was where I felt safe. It was where every corner held a memory, where every object told a story. I had 2 children. Daniel, the older one, was 52. He was always the more practical one, the more focused on money, on business, on numbers. And Lisa, 48, was always more emotional, more sensitive, but also more distant in recent years. That morning, when I saw Daniel's car parking in front of the house, I found it strange. He rarely visited me. Maybe once every 2 months, if that. And when he did visit, it was quick. He was always in a hurry. He always had something more important to do. But that morning, he wasn't alone. Lisa was with him. And there was an expression on their faces that sent shivers down my spine. A serious expression. Determined, prepared. "Mom, we need to talk," Daniel said, without even properly greeting me. Not a kind of hug. Juste had called. They came in. They sat down in the room, and I felt something in the air. Something heavy. Something bad. "Mom," Daniel began, taking some papers from a folder I hadn't noticed he was carrying. "We've made a decision. Lisa and I talked a lot about it, and we think it's what's best for you." My heart started beating faster. A bad feeling was growing in my stomach. "What's best for me?" I repeated, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Mom, you're 74 years old," Lisa said, in that tone of voice we use with children, that condescending tone that hurts more than any yell. "You can't stay alone in this huge house anymore. What if you fall? What if something happens? We worry about you." "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I take care of myself." Premier allouave. "Mom, don't be difficult," Daniel interrupted impatiently. "We've already decided. You're going to a nursing home, a good place, with care, with nurses. You'll be safe." I looked at him. Intoye searching for sign love, of compassion, of respect. But all I saw was cold determination. A decision already made. No room for discussion. "And the house?" I asked, my voice coming out, weaker than I wanted. "The house is going to be sold," Daniel said, as if he were talking about an old piece of furniture. "The proceeds will be split between Lisa and me. After all, it's our inheritance anyway. We're just getting ahead of things." and part of the money will go towards paying for the place you'll be staying. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt my heart shatter into such tiny pieces that I didn't know if I'd ever be able to put them back together. You can't do this, I said, tears beginning to burn my eyes. This is my home. I've lived here my whole life. Your father died here. You grew up here. You can't just take me out of here and sell it like it's nothing. Mom, don't be dramatic, Lisa said, in that same irritating tone. You'll like home. There are other people your age. You'll make friends. It'll be better than staying here alone, depressed, stuck in the past. I'm not stuck in the past, I said, my voice trembling with anger and pain. I'm living my life in my home, as I have a right to. Mom, legally, everything is settled, Daniel said, and there was something cruel in his voice now. Something final. We have power of attorney over your assets. You signed it when Dad was sick, remember? So we could help with the bills, with medical decisions. Well, now we're using that to do what's best for you. I remembered signing those papers years ago when Robert was dying and I could barely think straight. Daniel had said it was to make things easier, to help, so that he could take care of the practical things while I took care of Robert. I never imagined, I never dreamed that he would use that against me. You can't, I repeated, but my voice sounded hollow now. Defeat growing inside me. You can't just throw me out of my own home. We're not kicking you out, Mom, Lisa said, but her eyes didn't meet mine. We're moving you to a better place. To a place where you'll be taken care of. Lies, I said, and the word came out with more force than I expected. You're taking me out of here because you want my money. You want to sell this house and split the proceeds. It has nothing to do with my well-being. It has to do with this heavy bourdonnade, genuine. The moving truck is coming on Friday, Daniel said, completely ignoring what I had just said. You have 3 days to sort out what you want to take, only personal items. The rest will be sold along with the house. 3 days? I whispered, incredulous. You're giving me 3 days. That's enough time, Lisa said, already standing up, ready for leave on left. They simply left, leaving me there, alone, in the living room of my own house, which suddenly wasn't mine anymore, which had suddenly become their property, which had suddenly turned into just another asset to be liquidated. I sat there for hours. I couldn't move. I couldn't process it. I couldn't believe it was really happening. My children, the children I carried in my womb, the ones I cradled when they cried, the ones I fed, clothed, and educated, the ones I loved more than anything in this world. They were kicking me out of my own home, treating me like a problem to be solved, like a nuisance, like something disposable, and the worst part, the part that hurt the most, it was that they had the legal power to do it. I had given them, unknowingly, without realizing it, the power to take everything from me. For the next 3 days, I lived in a state of shock. I walked around the house like a ghost. I looked at every room, at every object, trying to memorize everything, trying to say goodbye to 47 years of life. I set aside a few things, just a few things, photos, some clothes, Robert's watch, the Bible that had belonged to my mother, small objects that carried big memories. Everything else would stay. The furniture that Robert and I had chosen together, the paintings we had bought on our travels, the books we had read, the dishes on which we had served 1,000 meals to our family. Everything was going to be sold, discarded, as if it meant nothing. On Friday, the truck arrived. It wasn't an ordinary moving truck. It was a small van, because I wasn't taking much. Just the bare minimum, the essentials. What fit into a life reduced to a single suitcase and to boxes? Daniel was there. Lisa didn't come. She couldn't look at me, apparently. She couldn't bear what they were doing. Is everything ready? Daniel asked, coldly, efficiently, already eager to finish. I looked at him, at the man who had been my baby, my first child. The child I had loved from the moment I knew I was pregnant, and I didn't recognize anything of him in those eyes. Do you know what you're doing? I asked, my voice coming out, firmer than I expected. Do you understand that you're kicking your own mother out of her house? Mom, we've already talked about this, he said, angrily. You're going to a better place. You're going to be taken care of. This is best for everyone. For everyone. Première repited. Or for you and your sister. For the money you'll make from selling this house. He didn't answer. He just grabbed my bag and put it in the van. The drive to the nursing home was silent. Daniel didn't say a word. Neither did I. There was nothing more to say. When we arrived, the place seemed institutional, clean, organized, but soulless, lifeless, without warmth. A nurse greeted me with a professional smile. She showed me my room, a small space with a bed, a wardrobe, a chair, a window overlooking a parking lot. This was my new home, my new reality. At 74 years old, after a lifetime of work, sacrifice, and unconditional love for my family, I had been reduced to this, to an institutional room, to a bed that wasn't mine, to a life that wasn't mine. Daniel left quickly. He barely said goodbye. He was already thinking about other things. About the money he was going to earn. About the plans he could make with that money. And I stayed there, sitting on the hard bed, in the cold room, looking out the window at an empty parking lot. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt before. Something that went beyond sadness, beyond anger. Something deeper, darker. I felt completely defeated, completely destroyed, completely empty. They had taken everything from me. My home, my independence, my dignity. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because I still hadn't understood something fundamental. Something I was about to discover. Something that was going to change everything. They could take my house away from me. They could take my belongings. They could put me in a place I didn't choose. But there was something they could never take away. Something that no one can ever take away. And when I found out what it was, when I finally understood, everything would change. Not the way I expected, not the way I had planned, but in a way I could never have imagined. The first few days at the nursing home were the hardest of my life, and I had already been through a lot. I had gone through the death of my parents, the death of my husband, losses, pain, challenges, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for the feeling of having been discarded by my own children, of having been treated like an inconvenient object, like something that needed to be removed, tidied up, put away out of sight. I would wake up in the morning, in that strange bed, in that room that smelled of disinfectant and loneliness, and for a few seconds, I would forget where I was. I thought I was home. In my home, in the bed that Robert and I had shared for decades. And then reality crashed down on me like an icy wave. And I remembered everything. The cold conversation, the expulsion, the betrayal, and the weight of it was almost unbearable. I spent my days sitting in my chair in my room, looking out the window, watching cars come and go from the parking lot, watching people visit other residents, bringing flowers, bringing smiles, bringing their presents. Nobody visited me. Daniel hadn't shown up, even once since he left me there. Lisa called once, on the second day, a quick call, full of barely disguised guilt, where she asked if I was adjusting well and hung up before I could properly answer. I felt like I had been erased, like my entire life had been reduced to nothing, like I no longer mattered, like I had ceased to exist as a person and had become just a solved problem, a task crossed off a list. There were other people there in the home, many others, people my age or older, each with their own story, each with their own losses, each trying to make the best of what was left. Some of them were friends. They talked in the common room. They played cards. They watched television together. They created a small community within those institutional walls, but I couldn't join them. I couldn't pretend everything was okay. I couldn't smile and make friends as if I hadn't just lost everything. I was alone, in my room, with my thoughts, with my pain, with my anger that grew stronger every day. Anger at Daniel and Lisa. Anger at myself for signing that damn power of attorney. Anger at the world for allowing this to happen. Anger at everything. And beneath the anger, something even darker. Something I'd evantomizel shame. Deep shame. Shame at having been discarded. Shame at being there. Shame at having failed in some way, although I didn't know exactly how or where. It was in the second week that I met Rose. I was sitting in the small garden at the back of the house, a tiny, green space with a few benches, some flowers, a few trees. It was the only place there that seemed to have any life, any connection to anything beyond those cold walls. And she approached, a woman more or less my age, perhaps a little older, completely white hair, short and well-groomed, bright blue eyes that seemed to see right through people, a gentle but not condescending smile. "May I sit down?" she asked, pointing to the empty space on the bench next to me. I shrugged. I didn't have the energy to be polite. I didn't have the energy to pretend I wanted company. She sat down any which way. She stayed there in silence for a few minutes, just observing the garden, the birds, the sky. And then she said, without looking at me, "You have that look." "What look?" I asked, my voice coming out, harsher than I intended. The gaze of someone who has just arrived, of someone who didn't choose to be here, of someone who was placed here by children who thought it more convenient. I looked at her, surprised by her brutal frankness. "How do you know?" "Because I had the same look when I arrived. 5 years ago, she finally looked at me, and there was something in her eyes, not pity, but understanding. My children put me here too. They said it was for my own good, that I couldn't take care of myself anymore, that it would be better this way. And was it? I asked bitterly. Better. She thought for a moment. It dépend. Depends on what? Whose person do you choose to be now? I frowned, confused. I didn't choose anything. They chose for me. They took everything from me. My home, my life, my freedom. I have no choice. They took your things, Rose said calmly. They took your home, your belongings, your physical space. That's true, and that's unfair. It's cruel. It's painful. So you agree that I have no choice? No, she said, with a firmness that surprised me. They took your things. But they didn't take you. And you always have a choice about who you are. Always. I felt anger rising. You don't. understand. You don't know what it's like. I know exactly how it feels, she interrupted, but gently. I know what it's like to wake up in a place you didn't choose, in a room that isn't yours, in a life that isn't yours. I know what it's like to feel discarded, betrayed, invisible. So you know there's no choice. There's nothing I can do. Yes, she said. You can choose how to respond. You can choose whether you're going to let it destroy you or whether you're going to use it to discover something about yourself. Discover what? I asked sarcastically. That my children hate me. That I raised ungrateful monsters. That my whole life has been a waste. No, Rose said, looking directly into my eyes now. You may discover that you are more than what they made you. That you are more than your circumstances. That you are more than where you sleep or the things you own. Nice words, I said bitterly. But words don't change anything. I'm still here. They still sold my house. None of that changes. You're right, she agreed. None of this changes. But you can change. And when you change, everything changes. I was going to answer. I was going to say she was talking nonsense. That she didn't understand anything. But something in the way she looked at me made me stop. There was wisdom there. Wisdom that came from having lived through something similar, from having been in the same dark pit where I was now, and from having somehow gotten out. How? I asked, my voice coming out weaker, more vulnerable than I wanted. How do you change when they've taken everything away? You stop measuring your worth by what you have or where you are, and you start measuring it by who you are, by what no one can take away. And what is that? What can no one take away? Je smiled, a smile that carried years of learning, your dignity, your posture, the way you see yourself, the way you carry yourself. They can put you in a small room, but they can't make you small unless you allow them to. His words hung in the air, heavy, true in a way I wasn't ready to accept yet. It's not that simple, I said, but without conviction now. No, it's not simple, she agreed. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. To maintain your dignity when everything conspires to make you feel worthless. To keep your head held high when they want you to bow down. To keep your light shining when everything around you is darkness. And did you succeed? Did you maintain your dignity? Some days yes, some days no. But every day I wake up and choose again. I choose not to let what my children have done define who I am. I choose not to let this place determine my worth. I choose to be who I want to be, not who circumstances say I should be. I remained silent, processing, resisting, but also feeling something small stir inside me, something that had been dead since Daniel gave me 3 days to leave my house. I don't know if I can, I admitted. You don't need to know now, Rose said, rising to leave. You just need to consider the possibility that you are stronger than you think, more valuable than they've led you to believe, more whole than your circumstances suggest. She started to walk away, but stopped and turned around one last time. Margaret, right? Try. Margaret, can I tell you something I learned here? He can. The people who put you here are living their lives out there, thinking about you rarely, if at all. And meanwhile, you're here, consumed by anger and pain and thoughts about them. Who's really trapped? Them, with their cruel choices. Or you, with your inability to move on. And she left, leaving me alone with those words that burned like embers. I stayed there in the garden for a long time after she left, looking at the flowers that someone had planted there. Flowers that grew even though they were in a confined space, in a small piece of land. surrounded by concrete. And I thought, if these flowers can grow here, bloom here, be beautiful here, even in less than ideal conditions, maybe I can too. Not the way I was before, not in the life I had before, but in some new way, in some way that I didn't yet fully understand. But the seed had been planted, the seed of possibility, of hope, of the idea that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as broken as I thought. Perhaps something in me was still whole, untouched, unbroken, and maybe, just maybe, I could build something from this, something that no one could take away, something that would truly be mine. But I still didn't know what. I still didn't understand how. I only knew that something had changed in that conversation. Something small, fragile, but real. And that was more than I had yesterday. In the days that followed my conversation with Rose, something inside me began to stir. It wasn't a dramatic change. It wasn't as if I had suddenly woken up, healed of all the pain, all the anger, all the feeling of betrayal that consumed me. But it was something, a small shift, a tiny crack in the wall of despair I had built around myself. I started paying attention to the people around me in a different way. I began to observe how they existed in that place, how some seemed to have completely surrendered, becoming mere shadows awaiting their end, how others, like Rose, seemed to have found something that kept them whole, something that made them more than just residents of a nursing home. Rose had a different demeanor. Even at, I estimated, 78 or 79 years old, she walked upright. She had a genuine smile. She spoke to the nurses not as someone inferior, but as an equal. She had friends there. She laughed. She participated in activities. She lived, and I started to wonder, how? How did she do it? How had she managed to transform that abandoned place into something resembling a home? How had she kept her light burning when everything should have extinguished it? It was one morning, perhaps a week after that first conversation, that I met Rose again. This time in the common room. She was with a group of 3 other women, all laughing at something one of them had just told them. I said, "Jouat," and I felt something strange. Envy of how light-hearted they seemed, of how they could laugh, of how they seemed to have accepted their lives in a way that I couldn't. Rose saw me. She waved. She called me. For a moment, I thought about refusing, about going back to my room, to my safe and familiar solitude. But something pushed me forward. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps disguised desperation, perhaps a tiny, almost imperceptible desire to try something different. I approached. I sat in an empty chair near the group. "Margaret, these are my friends," Rose said with a warm smile. "This is Dr. Cielan, and they greet me." Kind smiles, looks that held no pity, but understanding. Asif Dekni take me where I was. Exactly what I was feeling. Rose told us about you. Dorothy said she was small, frail in appearance, but had sharp, intelligent eyes. She arrived a few weeks ago, right? I nodded, and she's still in the anger phase. Patricia added, not as a judgment, but as an observation. We all go through it. You guys went to. I started, but I couldn't finish the sentence. Put here by their children, Helen finished for me. She was the oldest of the group, probably over 80, but she had a serene dignity that was impossible not to notice. Yes, all of us. In one way or another. Dorothy was placed here by her daughter after her husband died. Rose explained. Helen, by her 3 children who decided she could no longer take care of herself. Patricia, by her only son who wanted to have her apartment. Each story was a variation of mine, each one an echo of the same pain, of the same betrayal, of the same abandonment, disguised as concern. And how do you? I tried again, searching for the right words. How do you manage? Do you manage to laugh? Do you manage to look happy? It's not about appearing happy, Dorothy said, her voice soft but firm. It's about choosing not to let what they did determine who we are now. Rose said something similar. I murmured. But I don't understand. How can you just choose? How can you ignore what happened? How can you forgive? We don't ignore it, Helen said. And we don't necessarily forgive. Not in the sense of forgetting or pretending everything is okay. So what? I asked, my frustration growing. You just accept it. You just give up. We didn't give up, Patricia said. We changed our focus. The focus. I spent the first 6 months here, Patricia explained, her hands nervously fidgeting with a teacup, thinking about how my son had betrayed me, how he had taken my apartment, where I had lived for 30 years, so he could live there with his new girlfriend. I woke up thinking about it. I went to sleep thinking about it. Every second of my day was consumed by anger, by pain, by thoughts about him. I nodded, because that's exactly how I felt. That's exactly what I was experiencing. And then one day, Patricia continued, I realized something. He was living in my apartment, probably not even thinking about me. And I was here in a mental prison of my own making, completely consumed by him, who was really trapped. The same words Rose had told me, but coming from Patricia, with her specific story, her particular suffering, they carried a different weight. So you forgave him? I asked. No, she said bluntly. I stopped letting him live freely in my head. I stopped giving him the power to control my thoughts, my feelings, my days. He had already taken my apartment. I wasn't going to let him take my peace too. And how did you do that? How do you simply stop thinking about something that hurts so much? You don't stop completely, Rose interjected. Not overnight. But you start to redirect. Every time the thought comes, you consciously choose to think about something else, to do something else, to be something else. Be something else, I repeated, confused. To be more than the betrayed mother, Dorothy explained. To be more than the abandoned woman. To be more than the victim of her children's cruelty. But I am all of that, I said, tears beginning to burn. That's what happened to me. That's who I am now. No, Helen said, with gentle firmness. That's what happened to you. That's not who you are. Unless you choose to be, you keep talking about choice, I said, my voice coming out louder, more desperate than I intended. But I didn't choose any of this. I didn't choose to be expelled. I didn't choose to be here. Where is my choice? You didn't choose your circumstances, Rose said, leaning forward and holding my hand. But you do choose your response. You choose whether you're going to let it define you or whether you're going to use it to discover who you really are when everything else is taken away. And who am I? I asked, now with genuine despair. Without my home, without my belongings, without my children, who am I? That's the question, isn't it? Helen said, her old, wise eyes studying me. That's the question this place forces you to answer. And it's the most frightening and liberating question you can ask. There was a silence, a truly heavy silence, filled with shared pain and mutual understanding. Do you know what I discovered? Dorothy said, breaking the silence. That all my life, I've been defined by roles. Wife, mother, homemaker, and when my husband died, when my daughter brought me here, all those roles were taken away from me. And I panicked because without those roles, who was I? And did you find out? I asked. She smiled, a smile that carried decades of learning. I discovered that I am Dorothy, not someone's wife, not someone's mother, just Dorothy. And that Dorothy has value simply by existing. She has dignity simply by being alive. She has the right to occupy space, to have opinions, to matter, regardless of any role she plays. And is that enough? I asked, genuinely curious. Just being yourself. It's more than enough, she said. It's everything. I stayed with them that morning, talking, listening to their stories, their journeys, how each one had arrived at that place of acceptance, not of what had happened, but of who they were despite what had happened. And for the first time since I'd been kicked out of my home, I didn't feel completely alone. Because there were other people, people who understood, people who had lived through variations of the same pain, and who had survived, more than survived. They had found a way to flourish even in the most arid soil. In the following days, I began spending more time with them, starring roles Dorothea than Prisha. I started participating in meals in the common room instead of eating alone in my room. I started sitting with them in the garden, listening, sharing little by little my own pain. And something began to change inside me, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Bitchunging. I began to realize that I had been so consumed by anger and pain that I had completely forgotten about myself. I had forgotten that I was more than what Daniel and Lisa had done to me, more than the house he had lost, more than the belongings that had been sold. I started remembering little things about myself, things that had nothing to do with being a mother or a wife. Things that were just mine. I used to enjoy reading. I had forgotten about it. I had spent so much time occupied with the house, with responsibilities, that I had stopped reading for pleasure years ago. There was a small library in the house. I started picking up books, reading again, and it was like rediscovering an old friend, a part of me that had been dormant, forgotten, but that was still there, waiting. I enjoyed gardening. Rose invited me to help tend to the small garden in the backyard, and I felt my hands in the soil, felt the plants, saw things growing. It was therapeutic in a way I didn't expect. I started to take care of myself again, not too much, but a little, carefully combing my hair, wearing clothes I liked, not just what was practical. Small acts of self-care that I had abandoned because I thought it didn't matter anymore. That no one would see them anyway. That I wasn't worth the effort, but I could see it. I could see it when I looked in the mirror. And little by little, I began to recognize the woman who looked back. Not the woman I was before. Not the Margaret who had lived in that house for 47 years, but a new Margaret, a Margaret who was emerging from the ashes, a Margaret who was learning something fundamental about dignity, about self-worth, about existing with presence even when the world tries to make you feel small. And I realized something extraordinary, something that Rose's words and the words of the other women had planted in me. Daniel and Lisa had taken so much from me. My independence, my comfort, my possessions. But there was something they couldn't take away. Something that nobody could take away. My dignity, my posture. The way I chose to see myself. The way I chose to exist in the world. They could put me in a small room, but they couldn't make me small unless I allowed it. They could take my house away from me, but they couldn't take away my inner sense of home, my feeling of belonging to myself. They could take me away from them, but they couldn't take me away from myself. And when I began to understand this, to truly understand it deep in my soul, not just intellectually, but viscerally, everything started to change. Not my circumstances. I was still in the same place, in the same room, with the same children who had betrayed me. But I was different. And by being different, by carrying my dignity differently, by existing with a different presence, the world around me began to respond differently. The nurses started treating me differently. No ite ashpiti, but the thrispelf. Because I was carrying myself differently. Other residents started seeking me out, wanting to talk, wanting to include me. Because I was no longer just emanating pain and bitterness. I was beginning to emanate something different, something stronger, something more whole, and realize life responds not to what you say, not to what you think you deserve, but to what you emanate, to the energy you carry, to the way you see and treat yourself. For years, I had given my children complete availability, constant sacrifice, and they had responded by taking everything until there was nothing left. But now I was beginning to emanate something different: dignity, self-worth, a silent but firm refusal to be diminished. And the world was beginning to respond, not in the way I expected. Not with Daniel and Lisa coming back repentant, asking for forgiveness, but in other ways. Ways that I was only beginning to perceive. Ways that were showing me that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything. Perhaps I had simply lost what wasn't essential, and I was beginning to find what truly mattered. It was on a Saturday, maybe 6 weeks after I arrived there, that something happened. Something that tested everything I had been learning. Everything I thought I understood about dignity, about self-worth, about staying whole when the world tries to break you. Daniel showed up, without warning, without calling beforehand. He simply appeared. I was in the garden with Rose, Helen, and Dorothy, helping to plant some tulip bulbs that the home administration had bought. My hands were dirty with soil. I was laughing at something Dorothy had just said. I felt light. I was present. I was, for the first time in weeks, genuinely well. And then I heard my name. That familiar voice that had once filled me with love and now filled me with something far more complex. Mother. I turned around. And there he was, Daniel, in a suit, as always, looking rushed, as always, with that expression I knew so well. That expression of fulfilling an unpleasant obligation. My heart raced. My first reaction, that old, automatic reaction programmed into me by decades of motherhood, was to immediately stand up, hurriedly wipe my hands, rush to him, ask if he was okay, offer him something, be the available mother, the mother grateful for any crumb of attention. But I didn't do it, because something in me had changed, and I didn't yet know if it was a change strong enough to withstand him, but I was going to find out. Daniel, I said, my voice coming out calmer than I expected. I didn't get up. I remained, kneeling on the ground, holding a bulb in my hand. I saw surprise cross his face, as if he expected me to drop everything and run to him, as if he expected me to act as I always did. Are you gardening? He said, and there was something in his voice, disapproval, confusion, as if it were inappropriate for me to be doing anything other than sitting sadly in my room waiting for a visit from him. I am, I said. We're planting tulips. They'll be beautiful in the spring. Another uncomfortable silence. Rose, Dorothy, and Helen, with that sensitivity that comes from years of life, discreetly moved away a little, giving us privacy, but not before Rose gently squeezed my shoulder. A silent gesture of support. "Can I talk to you?" Daniel asked, and it wasn't really a question. It was an expectation. "Of course," I said. I carefully placed the bulb in the hole I had dug, covered it with soil, slowly removed my gloves, and wiped my hands on a cloth that was nearby, every movement deliberate, every action silently saying, "You are no longer the center of my universe. You no longer dictate my pace." I stood up, and for the first time, I looked at my son as an equal. Not from below, like someone begging for attention, but directly, with dignity. With présence. "Shall we go for a walk?" I suggested, indicating the small path that circled the garden. He nodded, clearly uncomfortable with this new dynamic that he didn't recognize, that he didn't know how to navigate. We walked in silence for a few moments. I didn't ask how he was. I didn't ask about Lisa. I didn't ask any of the anxious questions I used to ask, those desperate questions for connection, for information, for any piece of their lives they were willing to share. Premier jouet-aide. Because he had come here for a reason, and it wasn't my responsibility to make things easy for him. "You seem different," he finally said, breaking the silence. "Different how?" "I don't know." "More calm. Less, I don't know. Less desperate?" I offered, without malice, just an observation. He seemed uncomfortable. I wasn't going to say it that way, but it's true, isn't it? I was desperate. Desperate for your attention. Desperate to matter. Desperate to be remembered. Mother, it's not an accusation, Daniel. It's just an observation about who I was and about who I'm learning to be. He remained silent for a moment, processing. "Lisa said she called you and you weren't in the room, that the nurse said you were busy with activities." There was something in his voice, surprise, disapproval, as if it were impossible that I had anything to do but wait for their calls. "Yes," I said simply. "I've been busy making friends, participating in activities, living." He repeated, and there was something bitter in the way he said the word. "You are living here." "Yes, I'm living here because this is where you put me. So I do the best I can with what I have. We put you here for your own good," he said, now defensively, "so that you would be taken care of, so that you wouldn't be alone." "Daniel," I said, stopping walking and turning to look him directly in the eyes. "Do you really believe that? Or is it what you tell yourself to fall asleep at night?" I saw anger flash across his face, anger at being confronted, anger at having his comfortable narrative questioned. "I didn't come here to be attacked, and I'm not attacking you. I'm just telling you the truth. Something I should have done a long time ago." "What truth?" "You didn't put me here for my own good. You put me here because it was convenient for you. Because you wanted to sell the house. Because you didn't want to have to worry about me. Because it was easier to put me in a place where other people would take care of me, and you could go on with your life without guilt. That's not fair." "No," I asked, my voice still calm, still controlled, but with a firmness that came from deep within me. "Then tell me, Daniel, why did you wait 6 weeks to visit me? Why did you leave me here and never come back?" "I've been busy. Work, family, you were always busy. Always had work, always had excuses, and I always accepted them. Always said it was okay, always let you get away with it. But I'm not going to do that anymore. What else are you going to do? Be my mother." The words came out cruel, cutting, designed to make me feel guilty, to put me back in my place. to make me retreat and go back to being the compliant mother, the mother who never questions, who never confronts. But I didn't back down. I'm not going to be the mom who fades into the background to make your life easier anymore, I said. I'm not going to pretend everything's okay when it's not anymore. I'm not going to accept crumbs of attention as if they were celebrations anymore. I'm not going to measure my worth by how much you and Lisa remember me anymore. So what are you going to do? He challenged, with that sarcastic tone he used when he wanted to belittle someone. I'm going. Premier, c'est simple. I'm going to keep discovering who I am beyond being your mother. I'm going to keep cultivating dignity, presence, and self-worth. Things you can't give me. Things you can't take away. Dignity. He laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. You're in a nursing home. You have nothing. No home, no independence. And you talk about dignity. And there it was. The blow he hoped would destroy me. The cruel remark designed to remind me of my place, of my status, of my supposed worthlessness. And I felt the pain. Of course I felt it. Because those were words coming from my son, from the boy I had carried, loved, raised. But I didn't fall apart. Because I had learned something fundamental in the last few weeks. Something that Rose and the other women had taught me. Something I had discovered in the hours sitting in the garden, in the conversations in the common room, in moments of deliberate self-care. Exactly, I said, my voice firm, my eyes meeting his without flinching. I don't have a home. I don't have independence in the sense I once did. I don't have many of the things I thought I needed to have value. And yet, I have dignity. Because dignity doesn't come from where you live or what you own. It comes from how you see yourself, from how you treat yourself, from how you carry yourself in the world. That's nonsense, he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Cheap philosophy to make you feel better about the fact that you've lost everything. I haven't lost everything, I said, and for the first time, I truly believed those words. I've lost things. I've lost my house. I've lost my belongings. I've lost the illusion that my children loved me the way I thought they did. But I haven't lost myself. And as long as I haven't lost Felsil. And for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw something cross his face. Not regret, exactly. But something. Discomfort, perhaps. A crack in the armor of justifications he'd built. Why did you come here, Daniel? I asked, now softly, after 6 weeks. Why today? He looked away. He looked at the flowers, at the sky, at anything but me. Lisa said I should come. She said she was feeling guilty, that she thought we should visit you more often. And you, do you feel guilty? Another long silence. I did what I thought was best, he finally said. For everyone. Première repited. Or for you and Lisa. Mom, you didn't understand. The house was falling apart. You couldn't take care of it properly anymore. The bills were overdue. You were forgetting things. It wasn't safe. Lies, I said calmly, but with absolute certainty. The house was perfectly fine. The bills were paid. I wasn't forgetting anything. You invented problems to justify what you wanted to do anyway. You can't prove that. I don't need to prove it. I know, and you know. And now, you're going to have to live with it. I saw something break in his eyes. A defensiveness giving way to something more vulnerable, something more real. What do you want from me, Mother? He asked. And for the first time his voice held some genuine emotion, some weariness, something human. Do you want me to say I'm sorry, that I made a mistake? No, I said. And it was true. I don't want your apologies. I don't want you to try to fix what you did. Because you can't. You can't give me my house back. You can't bring back the years. You can't undo the betrayal. So what? I want you to be honest with me, with yourself, about why you did what you did. And I want you to live with that. I want you to look in the mirror and see who you really are, not who you pretend to be. Tears began to well up in his eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw my son, the boy he had been, before greed and convenience had transformed him into someone I didn't recognize. I'm not a monster, he said, his voice breaking slightly. No, I agreed, you're not a monster. You're just a man who made selfish choices and now has to live with them, just like I have to live with the consequences. Do you hate me? The question came out small, vulnerable, real. I thought for a long moment, exploring my heart, exploring what I truly felt. No, I finally said, I don't hate you. Première love you. You're my son. I will always love you. But love doesn't mean accepting everything. It doesn't mean pretending everything is okay. It doesn't mean erasing myself to make you feel better. I don't know what to do with this, he admitted. You don't have to do anything, I said. You just have to let me be who I am now. Let me live my life here. And if you want to be a part of it, you're welcome. But on my terms. With respect, with honesty, without me having to pretend I'm happy when I'm not, without me having to be grateful for crumbs. He nodded slowly. I don't know if he truly understood. I don't know if he was truly willing to change the way he interacted with me. But for the first time, I didn't care, because I no longer needed him to validate me. I no longer needed his approval to have value. I no longer needed his presence to feel whole. I had found something inside myself, something that no one could take away, something that was completely mine. Daniel left shortly after. He said he would try to come more often. He said he would talk to Lisa. He said several things that I had learned not to trust completely. But I was fine. Because I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't measuring my days by the frequency of their visits or calls anymore. I was living, truly, fully, as much as possible under those circumstances. I went back to the garden. Rose, Dorothy, and Helen were still there, waiting discreetly, respecting my space but ready to welcome me. How was it? Rose asked gently. Difficult, I admitted, but necessary. Did you hold firm? Dorothy asked. Yes, I said, and for the first time, I felt genuine pride in myself. I held firm. So you understand, Helen said with a knowing smile. What? Did I understand? That dignity isn't about what they do or say. It's about how you respond. And your wheat firmness, with self-respect. I nodded, feeling something warm spreading inside me. Something I didn't know exactly how to name. But it felt like strength. And I realized I had fundamentally changed. Not because my circumstances had changed. They hadn't. I was still in the same place. My children were still who they were. But I had changed the way I saw myself, the way I valued myself, the way I existed in the world. And by changing that, by changing my inner state, my posture, my energy, everything around me began to respond differently. Daniel had come to see me for the first time in 6 weeks. Not because I had begged him, but because something in him had perceived my absence in a new way. Because I was no longer emanating need. I was emanating completeness. The nurses treated me differently, with more respect. Because I treated myself with more respect, other residents sought me out. They wanted my company because I was no longer just radiating pain. I was radiating presence, dignity, value. And I understood something profound. Life is a mirror. It reflects back to you what you emanate, not what you say, not what you think, but what you truly believe about yourself deep in your soul. For years, I had exuded self-deprecation, constant sacrifice, total availability, without limits. And my children had responded by taking everything. But now I was emanating something different, and the world was responding differently. Not magically, not instantly, but consistently, inevitably. Because that's the law. The law that nobody tells you about, but that's always working. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are, what you emanate, what you truly believe you deserve. And I was beginning to believe that I deserved dignity, respect, genuine presence. And life was beginning to give me exactly that. The months that followed that conversation with Daniel were the most transformative of my life. Not because something external changed dramatically. Not because my children suddenly became different people. Not because my circumstances magically improved. But because I kept changing. I kept growing. I kept discovering layers of myself that I didn't know existed. I kept learning what it meant to exist with dignity, regardless of what the world around me did or didn't do. Daniel came to visit me again, not often, but occasionally, and each visit was different from the previous ones. Because I was different. Because I wasn't pretending anymore. I didn't smile when I didn't want to smile. I didn't say everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't erase myself to make things easier for him. And curiously, our conversations became more real, more honest, more humain. As if by stopping pretending, by stopping playing the role of the perfect and compliant mother, I had given him permission to also stop pretending, to also be human, flawed, imperfect. On a visit, perhaps 3 months after that first difficult conversation in the garden, he told me something that surprised me. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about why I did what I did. We were sitting in the common room. I was knitting, something Rose had taught me, something that kept my hands busy and my mind calm. And I asked, without stopping my knitting, without giving him my full attention immediately, because I had learned that I didn't need to drop everything every time someone wanted to talk to me. You were right, he said, and I heard something genuine in his voice, something vulnerable. It wasn't for your sake, it was for mine. And Lisa's, we wanted the money from the house. And it was easier to put you here than to deal with having you live with us or having to really take care of you. I stopped knitting. I looked at him. I saw tears in his eyes. Réal tears. Thank you for being honest, I said. And it was true, because honesty, even painful honesty, was better than comfortable lies. You're not going to say you forgive me? He asked, and there was hope in his voice. Hope for absolution, for relief from guilt. No, I said, gently but firmly. I won't, because forgiveness isn't something you can demand or expect. It's something that happens in its own time, if it happens at all. And I haven't gotten there yet. I saw disappointment on his face, but also, curiously, something akin to respect, as if he expected me to say that everything was all right, as I always did. And my refusal to do so, my insistence in fact, carried weight. But I thank you for being honest. I continued, for finally admitting the truth. That's a start. I don't know what kind, but it's a start. He nodded, and we sat there for a while, in silence. It wasn't a comfortable silence, but it was a real silence, honest, and that was more than I'd had with him in years. Lisa also started calling more frequently. The connections were difficult, full of unspoken guilt, excuses that weren't really excuses, attempts to justify the unjustifiable. But I wasn't making things easier for her. I wasn't saying everything was fine when she clearly wanted me to. I wasn't accepting her excuses when they were empty. I wasn't pretending our relationship was okay when it wasn't. And strangely, this created something new between us. It wasn't what we had before. It wasn't the idealized mother-daughter relationship I had dreamed of, but it was more real, more honest, and perhaps, with time, it could transform into something genuine. But I was no longer anxiously waiting for it. I was no longer measuring my days by the quality of our relationship. Because I had learned something fundamental, my happiness could not depend on them. My worth could not be in their hands. My peace could not be held hostage by their behavior. I had to find all of that within myself. And I was finding it day after day, choice after choice, moment after moment. Rose became my best friend, something I didn't expect at 74 years old. I thought that phase of life, of making deep, true friends, had passed, but I was wrong. We spent hours talking, in the garden room, in our bedrooms, drinking tea that we made with a small electric heater that Rose had. She told me more about her story, about how she had arrived at that place 5 years ago, broken, hopeless, thinking her life was over. About how she had struggled with deep depression, with thoughts that life was no longer worth living. What changed? I asked in one of those conversations. What pulled you out of that dark place? She thought for a long moment, her teacup warming her hands, her eyes gazing into the distance, at memories I couldn't see. I realized, she said finally, that I had spent my whole life deriving my worth from external things, from being a good motivator. And when all of that was taken away from me, when my husband died, when my children brought me here, when I no longer had a home to take care of, I felt I had no value anymore. And then I started to wonder, do I only have value when I'm useful to someone? Does my existence only matter when I'm serving some function for other people? And if the answer about Babumi life, about what I believed about human value, and did you find an answer? I found it, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. It was a long and painful process of deconstructing beliefs I'd held my whole life, of relearning what it means to have value, of understanding that I have inherent dignity simply by existing, not because of what I do, not because of what I serve, not because of the roles I play, but simply because I am human, because I am alive, because I occupy space in this universe. His words resonated deeply within me, because it was exactly what I was learning, exactly the journey I was on. And your children? I asked. How did they react to your move? She smiled, a smile that carried history, wisdom, acceptance. At first, they were confused. I had always been the mother who did everything for them, who sacrificed everything, who was always available. And suddenly, I wasn't like that anymore. I had limits. I had dignity. I had a life of my own, even here. And then some adjusted. They started to respect me more, to see me as a person, not just as a mother, and others. Others distanced themselves more because they didn't know how to relate to me when I was no longer convenient, when I was no longer just an extension of their needs. And does that hurt you? It hurt. At first, it hurt a lot. But then I understood. People who only want you when you're convenient, when you sacrifice yourself, when you don't have your own needs, those people don't truly love you. They love what you do for them. And when you stop doing that, when you become a real person with real needs, they leave. And are you at peace with that? I am, because I prefer to be loved for who I truly am, even by fewer people, than to be loved for a false version of myself by more people. Quality, not quantity. These conversations with Rose, with Dorothy, with Helen, with Patricia were my nourishment, my therapy, my education in how to live with dignity when everything has been taken away. And I realized something extraordinary. I was happier now, in that small room, in that nursing home, than I had been in many years in my big house, because I was no longer pretending. I was no longer sacrificing myself until there was nothing left. I was no longer living to please other people. I was living for myself, finally, completely, for the first time in my life. I started writing. I hadn't done that since I was young, but I began to put my thoughts, my feelings, my journey on paper. And there was something therapeutic about it, something liberating about giving voice to my experience, about witnessing my own transformation. I started helping other women who came to the home, women who arrived with that same look I had had, that look of defeat, of destruction, of believing that life was over. I would sit with them. I would listen to their stories. I would share mine. And sometimes I would see that same spark that Rose had ignited in me begin to ignite in them. That possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. More than survive, thrive. And I realized, by helping other people, by sharing my journey, I was consolidating my own transformation. I was reinforcing the lessons I had learned. I was becoming stronger, more centered, more whole. One day, perhaps 8 or 9 months after arriving there, I was sitting in the garden. It was early spring. The tulips we had planted months before were blooming, vibrant colors against the new green of the grass. And I looked at those flowers, and I thought they grew, even in this small space, even in these limited conditions, even surrounded by concrete. They found a way to bloom, just like me. I had been uprooted from my soil, transplanted to a place I didn't choose, placed in conditions I didn't want. But I had found a way to grow again, to bloom again, not in the same way as before, but in a new way, a way that was perhaps more authentic, more true, because when everything is taken away, when you lose all external crutches, when you have nothing left to hide behind, you are forced to discover who you really are. And either you completely disintegrate, or you discover a core of strength you didn't know you had. I had discovered this core, and it was unshakable, because it didn't depend on anything external. It didn't depend on where I lived. It didn't depend on what I owned. It didn't depend on how my children treated me. It depended only on me, on how I chose to see myself, on how I chose to treat myself, on how I chose to exist in the world. And that was my dignity. That was what no one could take away from me, no matter how hard they tried. They could take my house away from me. They had done it. They could take my belongings from me. They had done it. They could put me in a place I didn't choose. They had done it, but they couldn't take away my essence, my humanity, my inherent worth, my dignity. Because those things weren't on the walls of my house. They weren't in my possessions. They weren't anywhere outside of me. They were inside me. They always have been. Just waiting to claim them, to not them. And when I did that, when I finally understood that everything changed, not my circumstances, I was still in the same place. But I was different, fundamentally, profoundly, irreversibly. And by being different, by emanating dignity instead of despair, by radiating self-worth instead of need, the world around me responded differently. People treated me with more respect. Not because I demanded it, but because I respected myself. And self-respect is magnetic. It attracts respect from others. Opportunities arose, small things, like being invited to lead a reading group, like being sought out by other residents for advice, like finally being seen as someone of value, with wisdom, with presence. And my children, slowly, hesitantly, began to change how they related to me. Not completely, not perfectly, but noticeably. Daniel started asking me for my opinion about things, about his life, about decisions he was facing, as if he had finally realized that I had something to offer besides unconditional availability. Lisa began to share more about her struggles, about her insecurities, about her failures, as if my honesty about my own wounds had given her permission to be vulnerable too. We weren't a perfect family. Far from it. The wounds were still there. The betrayal was still real. The pain hadn't magically disappeared. But there was something new, something more real, something more honest. And perhaps, with time, this could transform into something resembling genuine reconciliation. But I was no longer eagerly waiting for it. I was no longer depending on it for my happiness. Because I had found something greater, something more lasting, something that no one could take away. I had found myself. Today, at 74 years old, almost a year after being evicted from my home, I look back and see the journey I've been on. And it's extraordinary. Not because my circumstances are extraordinary. They aren't. I still live in a nursing home. I still have a small room. I still don't have the independence I once had. But I am extraordinary. Not because I am better than anyone else, but because I discovered something that many people go their whole lives without discovering. Dignity cannot be given or taken away by others. It y a choisi daily by moment of how you see yourself, of how you treat yourself, of how you exist in the world. Value doesn't come from external circumstances. It doesn't come from possessions. It doesn't come from the approval of others. It comes from within. It comes from recognizing your inherent humanity, your inner light that no one can extinguish. Life is a mirror. It reflects back to you what you emanate. And when you change what you emanate, when you change your inner state, your energy, your belief about yourself, life responds. Not magically, not instantly, but inevitably, consistently. I radiated despair, and life gave me even more reasons to despair. But when I began to radiate dignity, life began to treat me with dignity. When I started to value myself, life began to reflect that value back to me. When I began to exist with full presence, life began to give me opportunities for that presence. Not because the universe conspired in my favor, but because I changed what I was willing to accept. I changed how I presented myself to the world. I changed who I believed myself to be. And this internal change created external change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but consistently, truly, profoundly. And I understood You can be evicted from places. You can lose homes. You can lose belongings. You can lose relationships. But you can never be expelled from yourself. You can never lose your essential dignity unless you choose to give it up. And as long as you hold on to that, as long as you honor that, as long as you live from that, you are never truly homeless. Because your true home is not a place. It is a state of being. It is the way you inhabit yourself. Rose once told me, during one of our deep conversations over tea and shared wisdom, Margaret, they took you out of the brick house, but you built a house inside yourself, and that no one can demolish. And she was right. I had built something inside myself, something solid, something unshakable, something that was truly mine. And that was the greatest victory of all. Not over my children, not over my circumstances, but over the old, destructive belief that my worth depended on external things. Today I know my worth is intrinsic. My dignity is unshakable. My light is inextinguishable. And as long as I know this, as long as I live from this, I am free, freer than I ever was, even when I had a big house and everything I thought I needed. Because true freedom isn't about external circumstances. It's about not being a prisoner of external needs, of external validation, of external approval. It's about being complete within yourself. And I finally am. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. That way, you'll be notified whenever a new story like this is shared here. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment. You can share if you've experienced something similar, what this story evoked in you, or even where you're watching from. Sometimes, writing a few words is the first step in realizing that you're not alone, that your dignity is real, that you matter.